Okay, let's get into this. We're diving deep today into a story that is it's profoundly tragic at its core. We're talking about the loss of a young life, Phoebe Bishop, and the really complex, deeply unsettling circumstances surrounding her death.
It's a case that's really struck a chord, hasn't it? Especially
Yes.
in Queensland, where it all happened. As we've gone through the source materials,
Mm.
the news reports, research notes, online community comments, a picture starts to form.
Mm.
And honestly, it's tough to look at.
Yeah.
So our aim here is to walk you through these sources, pull out the most crucial bits of information, the key facts, really focusing on the latest details we know and, importantly, the evidence that police have publicly said led them to lay charges.
Exactly. Think of this as us trying to sift through everything to get to the heart of what the sources actually tell us about this case. We'll guide you through the timeline, who the key people were, look at the accounts, which, frankly, often conflicted, and really examine the evidence that authorities pointed to.
Mm.
Now, we need to say this up front. This story involves some deeply sad and disturbing details. It really throws a spotlight on the vulnerabilities young people can face, especially when they feel unsafe, and the truly devastating outcomes that can follow. We're going to stick to the facts as presented in the sources, focus on what's known, and stay impartial.
Right. Our focus is squarely on understanding those known facts, the evidence as police have described it in these materials, and the narrative that emerges. We're not here to speculate beyond what the information actually supports. It's a difficult story, no doubt, but understanding it is important.
Okay. So let's begin with Phoebe Bishop herself. She was just 17, a teenager from Bundaberg in Queensland. The sources gave a description about 180 centimeters tall, pale skin, long dyed red hair, and hazel eyes.
And her family, well, they shared some really vivid descriptions of her personality. It helps, I think, to get a sense of the young woman we're talking about. Her mom, Kylie Johnson, called her strong-willed, someone who followed her own beat to life. And her aunt, Kaz Johnson, and others use words like feisty, a loudmouth, someone who doesn't beat around the bush. You get this picture of someone with a really strong character, maybe quite outspoken, not afraid to be herself.
Definitely. But the sources also suggest that beneath that strong personality, she was dealing with a pretty difficult background.
Yeah.
There's talk of a troubled upbringing, lots of moving back and forth between Queensland and New South Wales, changing schools frequently, dealing with multiple stepfathers. That kind of instability, especially during the teenage years, it can be incredibly tough, leaves you feeling really unsettled.
It really can. That constant sense of being uprooted, maybe not quite belonging anywhere, and the circumstances that led her to be living where she was when she disappeared, they really highlight the difficulty she was up against. According to the reports, she'd apparently fallen out with her mother, felt she had to run away from home. And that's how she ended up living in Gin Gin with James Wood, who was 34, and Tanika Bromley, 33. They were a couple, reportedly known to Phoebe's family.
And this is where the community perspective, the comments documented in the sources, adds this really heartbreaking layer.
Yeah.
People were saying things like she had a difficult family life, felt let down by both parents. The general feeling was she was in this share house situation because she just couldn't live at home anymore. And crucially, she felt she didn't have any other options because she had little money.
That right there, that lack of options, speaks volumes about her vulnerability. When a teenager, especially one with that history of instability, feels like there's nowhere safe to go,
Yeah.
they can end up in situations they wouldn't otherwise choose, just out of sheer necessity. It really underscores how vital, safe, stable environments are for young people.
And you see the desperation just pouring out of her last known text messages. Her aunt, Kaz Johnson, shared them and reading them. It's just gut-wrenching. Phoebe texted her saying she was up shit creek, that she absolutely needed to get out of this home for a bit. She called it a hellhole. Plain and simple.
Wow.
She was pinning everything on this trip she had planned. Said she was going to fly the bag out of here to see my boyfriend, and then this line, if it goes to plan, I'm not coming back. Just so final.
And her Aunt Kaz, looking back on those messages later, she said she realized with just immense pain that Phoebe was clearly reaching out.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, typical teenage drama about leaving home. This sounded like a genuine cry for help, feeling trapped. And this trip was her only perceived way out.
That planned trip was to fly over to Western Australia to be with her boyfriend. The last time she was reportedly seen was May 15th, 2025, in Bundaberg. Sources say she was carrying luggage, wearing a green tank top and gray sweatpants.
And the first sign something was wrong for the police at least, was when she didn't arrive in WA. She missed her flight.
Right. That was the trigger.
It's exactly. A missing persons report went out the very next day, May 16th. And even at that early stage, police were publicly saying they were concerned for her safety. They noted it was really out of character for Phoebe not to contact anyone, her family, her boyfriend, if she'd arrived safely, or even if her plans had changed. That initial concern pretty quickly ramped up into a major investigation.
And the focus almost immediately turned towards the people she was living with back in Gin Gin. Let's talk a bit more about them. James Wood, 34, and Tanika Bromley, 33. One detail from the sources that just feels incredibly unsettling now is that before any charges were laid, James Wood apparently posted on Facebook asking people to help find Phoebe.
Yet that detail, looking back now, knowing what police later alleged, it just adds this really disturbing layer, doesn't it? A public plea for help from someone police would eventually accuse of being involved in her death? It's a stark contrast.
Definitely. And police moved fast. By May 21st, that property in Gin Gin, where Phoebe, Wood, and Bromley lived it, was declared a crime scene. Officially.
And not just the house.
No, exactly. The gray Hyundai I-35 car they apparently shared was also declared a crime scene. That tells you investigators zeroed in on those locations, that specific vehicle, very early on as being central to figuring out what happened to Phoebe.
And there was another development, even before the murder charges came down, involving Tanika Bromley.
Right, the weapons charges.
Yes. On May 24th, she was arrested for separate weapon-related offenses. The specific charges mentioned in the sources were unauthorized possession of explosives, 1 count of possessing or acquiring restricted items, and 1 count of unlawful possession of weapons.
And the sources were clear. These were initially seen as separate from Phoebe's disappearance.
That's right. Initially unrelated, is how the sources put it. These items, weapons, explosives, they were found during searches of the Gin Gin home and also inside that same gray Hyundai.
Finding explosives and weapons in the home and car connected to a missing teenager. I mean, even if initially separate charges, it immediately suggests a really concerning, potentially dangerous environment.
It absolutely does. It adds another layer to that picture of instability. Phoebe was reportedly trying so hard to escape. It paints a grim picture. And then the sources reveal another detail found during the police searches at that Gin Gin property. It's deeply disturbing. They found lifeless dogs.
Lifeless dogs. Oh, that's horrible.
Reports mention 4 dogs were found dead and removed. But one neighbor's account, mentioned in the sources, suggested it could have been way more, believing maybe as many as 13 animals were discovered there.
13? That level of neglect is just profound. And the sources said neighbors had complained before.
Yeah, apparently neighbors have been calling in complaints about the dogs, the conditions, the sheer number of them, for months before all this happened.
Wow.
So this detail, when you put it together with the weapons, the later allegations, and other bits of info from the sources, it creates this really unsettling image of the conditions in that household. Severe lack of care. It suggests a potentially chaotic, neglectful environment overall.
And knowing a vulnerable teenager was living there just makes it so much worse.
Exactly. It amplifies the concern massively. The sources also included some community comments suggesting the area, maybe even that specific house, was known locally as a cesspit of drug abuse.
And other concerning details about Wood and Bromley came out too, didn't they? Especially in those community discussions online.
Yes. There were reports, for instance, of a DVO, a domestic violence order. Apparently, Tanika had taken one out against James Wood.
But she was still living there.
That's what the sources indicated, yeah. Although one Reddit comment specifically mentioned she was living in a bus parked out the front of the property, not necessarily in the main house.
Okay.
And another Reddit comment alleged that Wood had recently beaten her quite badly enough that she needed hospital treatment.
Oh my.
And Tanika Bromley's own brother was quoted in the sources saying that she'd really gone off the rails after she got involved with Wood. Now, some of this is from community accounts, not official statements, but taken together. It paints a pretty consistent picture of a very troubled, possibly volatile relationship and living situation.
And the sources also mention Wood himself was sometimes living out of his car.
That's right, which just adds to that overall sense of chaos and unpredictability surrounding their living arrangements.
So you've got weapons, explosives, dead animals suggesting extreme neglect, reports of domestic violence, potential drug links, general instability. It's just a truly grim environment that Phoebe had moved into, the place she called a hellhole.
Exactly. A very grim picture indeed.
And against that backdrop, police were really zeroing in on the car, that gray Hyundai.
They were. By May 21st, just days after she was reported missing, they put out a specific call for dash cam or CCTV footage of that car.
Why? What was her thinking?
Well, their theory, based on the sources, was that this was the car Phoebe was last seen in. They desperately needed to track its movements between May 15th, the day she disappeared, and May 18th, especially around Gin Gin. They were trying to piece together exactly who was in that car and where it went during that critical time frame.
Because that car and what happened in and around it seems to be right at the center of the conflicting stories.
Absolutely crucial, because it ties directly into the story the housemates, Wood and Bromley, initially told about what happened on May 15th. A story that police evidence, as stated in the sources, would eventually completely contradict.
Okay, so this is really the core of the mystery, isn't it? The conflicting accounts of that supposed trip to the airport on May 15th. Let's lay out the housemate's version first. This mostly comes from James Wood's account, apparently leaked through texts he sent a friend.
Right, so their story was, they were driving Phoebe to Bundaberg Airport for her flight to WA. Wood claimed Phoebe loaded a big duffel bag into the car. He described it as almost the size of her.
That detail about the bag,
Yeah.
it definitely sparked a lot of later speculation in those online discussions we saw.
It did. But according to Wood's version, Phoebe was anxious, kind of worked up about seeing her boyfriend, wanted to look nice. He claimed he gave her a pair of his new gray trackies to wear because she felt she didn't have anything suitable.
Which someone online pointed out seemed a bit odd, right? The size difference?
Exactly. A Reddit comment highlighted that. Wood supposedly wears 3XL. Phoebe was 17, tall but thin, likely a much smaller size. The comment questioned why she'd need his huge trackies if she supposedly had this massive duffel bag full of her own clothes. It felt inconsistent, even within their own narrative.
Okay, so what else did they claim happened on the drive?
Well, they said Tanika passed makeup back from her bag so Phoebe could put it on in the car. Then they claimed they stopped near the airport, specifically on Airport Drive, around 9:15 a.m. Why? Because Phoebe was supposedly feeling anxious.
And whose idea was it to stop?
Wood's idea, according to his leaked texts. He said he suggested pulling over and that he and Tanika would walk away from the car for 5 minutes just to give Phoebe some space to calm down.
Right. And then the crucial part of their story.
The crucial part. They claimed that when they came back to the car after those 5 minutes, Phoebe was just gone. Vanished.
Gone just like that.
Just like that, according to them. They said they then drove around the nearby streets looking for her. Even went towards the terminal area, but didn't actually go inside the terminal building.
And the reason for not going inside?
Wood's explanation, again from those leaked texts, was they didn't want to seem like parents hovering over her by following her into the terminal.
Okay. And there was another detail they added, wasn't there? Something about money.
Yes. Wood claimed, in those same texts apparently, that Phoebe had stolen $5,000 in cash and some jewelry from them.
And how did he frame that?
He seemed to offer it up as a reason why she might have just bolted, run away, maybe used the money to disappear.
But others saw that differently.
Well, a Reddit comment pointed out that while Wood might have intended it to suggest she ran away, it could just as easily be seen by investigators or anyone else as providing a possible motive for harming her, a financial motive.
Right. So that was their story. She had a big bag, needed his trackies, got anxious. They left her alone for 5 minutes near the airport. She vanished. And maybe she stole money.
That's the gist of their account. But then you have the police evidence. And this is where Detective Inspector Mansfield's statements, reported in the sources, deliver a direct and absolutely devastating contradiction.
This is the crucial part from the police investigation. What did he say?
Detective Inspector Mansfield was completely clear. He stated that Phoebe Bishop never made it to the airport terminal area in a way that would have allowed her to just get out and walk off as Wood and Bromley claimed.
Never made it there.
And then came the really powerful statement, the one that directly refutes their story. We will allege that our evidence will outline that 3 people arrived near to the airport and 3 people never exited that vehicle.
Wow. Let that sink in. 3 people arrived near the airport, and 3 people never exited that vehicle.
Exactly. It shatters the housemate's narrative. According to the evidence police say they have, Phoebe did not get out of that Hyundai near the airport and disappear. 3 people were in the car when it got there, and police allege, based on their evidence, that 3 people were still in the car when it drove away. She did not get out.
That completely changes everything. It also explains why some of those early media reports might have been confusing, the ones saying she was last seen on Airport Drive carrying luggage around 8:30 a.m.
Precisely. Because, as the sources noted, that sighting seems to have come only from the housemates themselves. There was a distinct lack of independent evidence mentioned. No other witnesses reported seeing her there. No mention of CCTV confirming she ever got out of the car or was even near the terminal.
Okay. What about the phone call to her boyfriend that morning?
Ah, yes, that detail also came up in the sources. Reportedly, a call was made to her boyfriend around 8:30 a.m. on May 15th, supposedly while she was on the way to the airport.
And did he hear her?
That's where it gets murky. The sources mentioned there were conflicting reports about whether the boyfriend actually heard Phoebe's voice during that call. That ambiguity fueled a lot of speculation online.
Understandably. People wondered if maybe it was a call for help.
That was definitely speculated in the Reddit comments, yeah. Given what police later alleged, some wondered if it was a desperate, maybe secret attempt to signal for help that got cut short, maybe by someone else in the car.
And there was another claim related to that, from the boyfriend's father.
Yes. Mentioned in Reddit comments, citing a Facebook post, supposedly from the boyfriend's father. The claim was that James and Tanika had been arguing with Phoebe, or maybe even abusing her, earlier that same morning while the son was on FaceTime with her.
Earlier that morning, before the airport trip.
If true, yes. It would suggest a tense, potentially volatile situation hours before they even supposedly set off for the airport.
Which brings us to another deeply disturbing piece of information from those Reddit comments. The neighbor hearing something early that morning.
The 5 a.m. scream. Yes. A neighbor reportedly heard shouting, which apparently wasn't that unusual coming from that property, but then distinctly a scream. Around 5 o'clock in the morning on May 15th.
A scream at 5 a.m. that's hours before the alleged 9:15 a.m. stop near the airport.
Exactly. And this scream was apparently reported to Police Link, the non-emergency line. But the comment alleged it wasn't followed up by police until about 8 a.m.
If that timeline is accurate, a scream at 5 a.m., it immediately raises the possibility, as people speculated online, that something awful happened much earlier. An altercation, maybe resulting in injury or even death, right there at the house.
Which would make the whole airport story.
A potential cover-up. A way to explain her disappearance hours later after the fact. The comment also mentioned the neighbor heard a male yelling too.
And thinking back to that large duffel bag Wood mentioned.
Right. The speculation around that.
In those Reddit discussions, people wondered if maybe the bag wasn't for clothes at all. Could it have been used, horrifyingly, to conceal her body? Someone even suggested maybe police saw something related to a bag on CCTV footage from the car's movements, which could explain their intense focus. And the whole detail about her needing his trackies despite having this huge bag, it just seems suspicious to many.
So when you put all these pieces together, the housemate's story about her vanishing near the airport, the police evidence saying she never got out of the car, the lack of independent witnesses, the questionable details like the bag and trackies, the theft claim potentially offering a motive, and then that deeply troubling report of a scream at 5 a.m.
It makes the police position, articulated by Detective Inspector Mansfield, much clearer. He stated they had gathered evidence suggesting a motive for an alleged murder, and crucially that they had enough evidence to charge both Wood and Bromley. Their story just didn't add up against the evidence police say they uncovered.
With all this mounting evidence and the clear contradictions, the search for Phoebe must have intensified hugely.
Oh, dramatically. By May 23rd, just over a week after she vanished, homicide detectives were officially involved. Specialized units, including police divers, joined the search operation. And the search area itself expanded significantly beyond just Gin Gin.
Where did they start looking?
The focus broadened quite a bit. They concentrated searches in places like Goodnight Scrub National Park, that's about 40 kilometers south of Gin Gin. Perhaps significantly, it's roughly an hour's drive from the Bundaberg airport area. They also searched other spots in the wider Gin Gin region, specifically mentioning Mingo Road and Gayndah Road.
And the sources said there was a specific concerning reason they expanded the search to remote areas like the national park?
Yes. Police reportedly received information suggesting that evidence linked to the case might have been moved from the park before investigators even got there.
Moved from the park? That's chilling. Suggests a deliberate effort to conceal evidence.
It really does. And searching those vast, dense bushland areas required specialized help. The sources mentioned they brought in specially trained dogs, including cadaver dogs, dogs trained specifically to locate human remains. Forensic teams were also out there, painstakingly collecting items, bagging them in those brown evidence bags for analysis.
And it was this huge, difficult search effort, guided by specific leads, that ultimately led to the discovery.
Tragically, yes. Telephone data was reported as playing a key role, apparently pointing investigators towards a critical area within or near Goodnight Scrub National Park. And it was there, near the park, that human remains believed to be Phoebe Bishop's were eventually found.
When was the discovery confirmed?
Detective Inspector Mansfield made that devastating announcement on June 7th. It confirmed the discovery 3 weeks after Phoebe was last seen. 3 weeks for her family, waiting, hoping, and then getting that news. It's just unimaginable.
3 long weeks of pure agony ending like that. Heartbreaking. And police also made another significant statement about the body itself.
Yes. They stated publicly that they believe the missing teen's body may have been moved more than once after she was allegedly murdered.
Moved more than once.
That specific allegation ties directly into the charges that followed. After the remains were found and the investigation continued, James Wood and Tanika Bromley were arrested.
And the charges?
Both were charged with 1 count of murder. And, significantly, given the police statement about the body being moved, they were also both charged with 2 counts of interfering with a corpse, all in connection with Phoebe's disappearance and death.
Interfering with a corpse. The sources explain that usually involves actions to hide, change, or dispose of a body.
Right, exactly. So the police allegation that her body was moved, possibly multiple times, fits directly under that charge. It suggests alleged attempts to conceal her remains or maybe hinder the investigation.
And beyond the charges related to Phoebe.
Well, the sources noted James Wood also faced those separate, unrelated weapons charges from the items found earlier. And Tanika Bromley also still faced her separate, unrelated weapons charges, the ones we mentioned before, for which she was apparently granted bail, even while facing the extremely serious charges related to Phoebe.
It's just such a complex and disturbing picture. This case, obviously, is now proceeding through the Queensland legal system.
Yes, and the sources mentioned briefly that Queensland is what's known as a code state. Basically, its criminal laws are mostly written down in legislation, the criminal code, rather than relying heavily on past court decisions like in common law states. Just a bit of legal context.
And the sources also noted the human element at the court appearances.
They did. Mentioned Phoebe's sister Kay and a local resident named Mandy were there when the charges were first laid. Their presence really highlights the deep personal impact this had and the community's intense focus on seeing what happens next.
Which brings us to the human cost. Beyond the investigation, the evidence, there's a family just completely shattered by this.
Absolutely. Phoebe's mother, Kylie Johnson, her words convey such raw grief. She described feeling ripped apart. Her plea was just heartbreakingly simple, wanting to know where she's resting so she could bring her home.
Just wanting to bring her daughter home. Devastating. And her sister.
Her sister, Kay Bishop, also spoke through her pain. A simple but powerful statement. Phoebe was loved and is missed. In the face of such violence, those words just resonate so deeply.
And her aunt, Kylie Johnson, the one who got those last texts.
Yeah. She spoke about the pain of looking back, realizing how clearly Phoebe was crying out for help in those messages. She even said before the remains were found, she had this awful feeling, this premonition that Phoebe wouldn't be found alive. Living with that knowledge and those last words, it must be an almost unbearable weight.
You can feel the community mourning, too, can't you? The sources mentioned tributes.
Yes, visible signs of grief. Bouquets of flowers being left both at the Gin Gin property where she lived and also near the Bundaberg airport, those 2 key locations in the story of her disappearance.
And online, social media reactions.
A lot of reaction there, reflecting deep sadness, but also real anger. Comments like, "Rip, young lady, you didn't deserve this. Hope those 2 rot in their jail cells, sending love to the family." And that local resident, Mandy, who went to court, was described as being visibly emotional, just heartbroken that this happened in her community.
There was also some difficult discussion online, wasn't there? Particularly regarding Phoebe's mother.
Yes, it's important we acknowledge that, as it was documented in the sources, particularly on platforms like Reddit, there were some very different strong opinions expressed.
Right, and we need to be clear, we're just reporting what was in those community discussions found in the sources, not endorsing any viewpoint. Some comments were quite critical of the mother.
They were. Some suggested she might bear some responsibility, using phrases like she kicked her out or was shady or let her stay there anyway, implying she shouldn't have allowed Phoebe to be in that situation.
But there was a strong defense of her, too.
Absolutely. Other comments passionately defended the mother. They argued Phoebe wasn't kicked out, but offered other accommodation due to conflict. They pointed out the mother was reportedly friends with Tanika and couldn't possibly have foreseen such a horrific outcome. These comments argued strongly that blaming a grieving mother was sick and disgusting, and that the blame should lie solely with those accused.
So a really divided reaction in parts of the community online. It really shows the raw emotion, doesn't it? People grappling with how something so awful could happen, searching for answers, maybe even assigning blame in their grief. It's not a reflection of proven facts, but of the community's pain.
Precisely. It highlights the intense feelings the case stirred up. But ultimately, what every source comes back to, heartbreakingly, is the tragic loss of a 17-year-old girl's life.
Yeah, the language used, that poor kid, she's just a baby, 17.
Right.
It just conveys that deep sadness, especially knowing she was actively trying to get out, making plans for a future with her boyfriend, trying to escape a bad situation, only for it to end like
It's
this.
profoundly tragic.
So after going through all these details from the sources, let's try to summarize. What can we say we definitely know based only on this material, and what questions still seem to linger according to these sources?
Okay, based strictly on the source material, we know Phoebe Bishop was 17, had a tough background, and desperately wanted out of her living situation. She moved in with James Wood and Tanika Bromley in Gin Gin. She vanished on May 15th, the day she planned to fly to WA. We know Wood and Bromley gave an account. They took her near the airport. She got out, disappeared.
But crucially, police evidence contradicts that. Detective Inspector Mansfield stated police allege she never exited the vehicle near the airport.
Right. We know the search expanded massively, guided by evidence like phone data, leading to areas including Goodnight Scrub National Park.
And tragically, human remains, believed to be hers, were found near that park.
We also know police allege, based on their evidence, that her body was moved more than once after her death. And as a result of all this, James Wood and Tanika Bromley have been charged with murder and 2 counts of interfering with a corpse. Police has stated their evidence supports these charges and points to a motive.
Okay, so those are the core facts and the police position as laid out in the sources, but the sources also reveal gaps, contradictions, questions that remain unanswered in the public domain, at least based on this material.
Definitely. For instance, the precise sequence of events on the morning of May 15th, it's still debated in those community comments, especially the exact timing and significance of that reported 5 a.m. scream and the details around the initial police response.
And the phone call to the boyfriend around 8:30 a.m., still not entirely clear from the sources what was actually heard, especially given those conflicting reports about hearing her voice.
And as we discussed, the sources point to a lack of independent confirmation CCTV or other witnesses that definitively puts Phoebe in the car that morning or backs up the housemate's specific version of events near the airport.
The alleged $5,000 theft Wood mentioned, the sources don't really confirm whether police corroborated that or what the details were.
We also don't have a complete picture of the living conditions at the Gin Gin house beyond those really awful details about the dead animals and the weapons found there.
And while police say they have evidence of a motive for the alleged murder, the specifics of that motive haven't been fully detailed in the public sources we looked at.
Finally, the allegation that the body was moved more than once, the specifics of how, when, why, or the evidence for multiple movements aren't fully laid out in the material provided.
Right. So we've taken this deep dive into the really complex, often conflicting, and just profoundly sad details around Phoebe Bishop's disappearance and death. We focused on the evidence that has emerged, the evidence police say led to these charges.
It's a case that really serves as a powerful, very somber reminder, doesn't it, of the vulnerabilities young people can face, especially when they're in difficult or unstable situations, and the devastating impact violent crime has, not just on the immediate family, but on friends, the whole community.
The legal process is underway now for Wood and Bromley. As that moves forward, perhaps more details will come to light. It's certainly far from over for everyone affected by this immense tragedy.
As you think about everything we've discussed, consider all the layers here. You have a young person desperately trying to find a better, safer situation. You have the environment she ended up in. You have these starkly contradictory accounts of her last known day. And then you have the police evidence that tragically points towards her life being taken and efforts made to conceal that. It really forces us to think about support systems for vulnerable youth and about warning signs that are sometimes just tragically missed or maybe only become clear with hindsight.
What stands out most to you from this deep dive into the known details and the evidence surrounding Phoebe's case? It's just a heartbreaking story, a young life lost far, far too soon.